Hello everyone, on the last video we talked about displaying data on our web page using HTML table, but today we're going to be talking about something more interesting, which is actually HTML form. I'm very sure that every one of us here we've actually used HTML form on this website or that website. So in our today's web, aside from displaying data, we also want to send the information. And the only way we can send information from one person to another person over the internet is by using forms. So we see forms everywhere we go. Some forms doesn't really look like form. Like for instance, when you're about to log into Facebook, you're actually filling a form that is asking you for your username and your password. That is a form. When you're logging into your email, Gmail for instance, you actually fill in a form for your email and your password. So those are forms. That's actually a kind of form. And we have other kind of form, like when you're registering for a school, or when you're registering for a particular software or anything. You could just fill any kind of form. So forms actually is a very important part of web technology today. It's a very important part of the web platform. So we're going to get started by building new forms for our HTML now. Welcome back. So to get started with forms, we're going to create a new file here, and this time around we'll call this file forms. We'll call it file forms, and we'll write forms over here because we're going to be talking about form. So I'm just going to be creating different kind of forms today, and we'll just see how that's going to go. So the first form I'm going to create is still a sample form for a student to log into the student portal. So the student actually needs the student email and the student password the student email address and the student password to log in to the student portal. So let's go. I'm going to write down the code and I'm going to explain it. So the first thing I'm going to write is actually field sets. So this is actually field sets. Okay, so I just corrected that. We have field set, and here we have legend. So we have legend, and I'm going to say student login. This means to be small t. Student login, and here I would say inputs. Inputs is of type of text, and then I would say over here, I want to have a label for the input. So over here, I'm going to have a label, and I'm saying that this one is for the student's email, or I would just call it email. And here I would say I'm giving this an ID of what email. So let me explain what's going on here. I showed that for some of us, we might be lost already. So before I explain, I'm just going to say enter your email. So I'm sure with this you already have an idea of what is going on. So this is it. Our field set is actually an HTML tag that is used to group a certain set of data. So in this case, I actually want to make the username, the email input and the password input to be in the same group, and that's why I'm using the field set. And this legend is just like a descriptive text that shows that, oh, this group is actually the student's login portal. So you're going to see this in action when I display it on the web browser. So before then, I'm going to add another label, and I'm going to say this is for the password, and I'm going to call this one here password, and over here I'll say inputs inputs. I keep making mistakes. Inputs, and in my inputs over here, I'm just going to take this away. Here we have inputs, and my input is of type password and no longer text. So you could see that over here our input was text and now our input is password. We're going to know the difference between those things later on, and I'm going to give this an ID of password. Now let me explain in detail. Over here we have our label. Our label is like a descriptive text, and this is like a text box. So we write our email address over here, and then we write our password over here. And when we view this on our web browser, we can see what we have. So first we have what? Our email. We have a box, we have our password, and we have a box. So we can quickly type in our email address, or we could click here and type in our password. And watch what's happened when we type in our email address. We could say sample at email.com over here. And over here we could then say our password is password. Now, can you see that our password is not actually being displayed because it's actually meant to be confidential? So that's been said. Over here we have enter your email address. So what happens when we click on enter your email address? Just watch. I click on this and the box gets selected. I click on this and the box also gets selected. Why is that happening? So that's happening because I actually binded the label, which is this. What we have here is the label, and this is the input. So I binded the label and the input together with this label is for the email. Where is the email? This is the input with the ID of email. So this email over here is the relationship, is like connecting this label with the input together. So this is for the ID of email, and the ID of this email is this input. So that's the connection. So whenever we click on the label, we actually select the input. Click on the label, select the input. So that's just how labels and input actually works. So same thing applies to the password as well. Whenever we click on the password label, it selects this. So just to prove that, I'm going to remove the label over here, or I'm going to remove the 4 attributes over here, and then I'm going to save that, refresh this, and let's click on enter your email. You can see we don't have anything, nothing is happening over there because we've removed the 4 that actually serves as a relationship between the label and the input. Now you can see that my ID is actually flagging that there's an error here, and the error is that I do not have a label that associated with this input. So if I should click on Ctrl Z to undo this, now I have a relationship. So there are 2 ways of adding of making a label to be for a particular input. So this is the first way, and the second way is to do it this way without adding the 4 or without adding the ID. I could go this way, take my label over here, wrap it across the inputs, and this would just work so fine. I will come over here and do it this way. So I have my label being the parent of the input. So I actually put my input tag in between my label tags, and this would work just fine like before. So over here, when I click on enter, you can see that my email input is being selected. When I click on enter your email, the email input is being selected. So same thing is going to work for the password as well. So now that we know that, I'm going to undo this and save this file. Now, if you notice as well, we have this email and inputs appearing side by side, all appearing on a straight line, and I personally do not like this method. So the reason why it's appearing this way is because the label is actually an inline element. Same thing with the inputs. The input is actually an inline block element, so that's why they are appearing side by side. If assuming they are actually block elements, they would have been appearing like one at the top and the other one beneath it. So I'm actually going to change that by applying a new element called the div to it. But before then, I would like to say this. Here we have the student's login. So for the student's login is actually this legend that we have here. So we can see it's given a kind of a description of what this form is all about. And over here, this border over here is made possible by the field set. So if I should remove this or comment it by pressing Ctrl/ on my keyboard and also commenting this, I actually didn't close the field sets over here. So by commenting this, I'm going to say, sorry, give me a minute. I actually didn't close this over here. So that was a mistake. I should have closed this. So now I'm going to comment it, and I'm going to comment the closing tag as well. And let's see what happens. So we could see we don't really have that border being wrapped around it anymore. That's great. So we're going to add that back now that we know what that's doing already. This being said, I have one more thing to add. It's also an input, but a special kind of input. So I'm going to say that's what inputs, and this type is what submit. And this time around, I'm going to give it a value. I'm going to say the value is equal to login. Is equal to login. So let's see what this is going to give to us. So this is giving us an extra button, and this time around it's not giving us a box to write anything on. So this is just how HTML works. Whenever we have HTML of a type of submit, it doesn't really give us a text box. It gives us a button. So the value is actually what is going to be written on the button. So this is more like the button that we're going to use to log in to this form. But there are actually other ways of specifying a button. So the other way to specify a button is to come here. We can open a tag and go button and close the tag. So remember, input elements actually has only an opening tag. There is no closing tag. But for a button, we have a closing tag attached to it. So we could say that this is, let's say, forget password. So this is the button, and we're just calling the button forget password. Now let's save this and let's refresh. So we can see we have another button here called forget password. That's great. So I also would like to say something over here. So over here, we also have another type that is actually called email. Instead of using the type text, since this is an email, it is more appropriate for us to use type email for this as well. So there's actually, it's not really going to make any difference visually, but when we actually start dealing with JavaScript, we can use things like this to make custom validation for our inputs. So that's just it, and this is a sample login form. Actually, I'm just going to use a new HTML document. It's not really new, but I've not really talked about this HTML document before in this series. So this HTML document is actually called div. So I'm going to introduce a new element called div. So div is actually, I would say, one of the most used HTML documents in the world, HTML elements rather, in the world. So it's very, very common. Like, we use it every single now and then, and it's a block element. So in this case, I'm going to wrap these two in a div element, so that they are going to appear as within a block element. And I'll create another div here as well. Create another div, and I'll wrap these two in a div element. I'll cut this and I'll put it over here, and take this extra spacing, go div, and I'll put this two into this new div as well, just to make our form to appear a bit nice. So let's refresh this. Now you could see as our form is actually appearing a bit nice, one actually after the other. So we have the email the email here, we have a box, we have the password, another box, and things like that. So yes, I know this not still appearing so nice like the kind of form you see out there when you're on Facebook, when you're on this site, that site. So this is actually not what you say, whoa, this is a great form. It's really not a great form, and that's because we are yet to style this up with CSS. And in our next video, we are going to be talking about CSS, how to use CSS to style all this. But for now, I'm just going to be using a trick to style this particular HTML form, and this is going to be using the knowledge that we have from our previous video, which is dealing with tables. So I'm going to use table, put all this enter your name, enter your email. I'm going to put it on a separate column, put the input on another column. So to just give it a kind of a proper styling, and this could also refresh your memory on what the table is all about. So let's do that quickly. I'm going to leave this form here, and I'm just going to create another form, and in this case, I'm going to say field sets. I'm going to say field sets, and here I go label. I close this tag, and my first label, I'll just do copy and paste this time around. I'll just copy this, but before then, I have to create a table. So I'll go table. This is my table. I'm going to use only T-body. I'm not using T-header this time around. So T-body, and in my T-body, I'm going to create my first row. If you remember, I used TR to create the first row. Then I'll create my first column. Now, in my first column, I'm going to place my label. So I'm going to copy this over here, and I'll place my label on the first column over here. So I'm going to create another column, TD, and I'll place my inputs over here. I'll copy this, I'll place my inputs within the next column. So, and for some reasons, my IDE is flagging this because when these two elements are in different columns, they can't communicate with each other, kind of. So that's why my IDE is flagging this. So I'm going to leave this that way, and I'm going to create another row, which is TR, and I'll say TD over here. Then I'll take this next label. I'm going to put it over here, and I'll come here, another TD. Then I'll take in this other inputs, copy it, and I'm going to paste this over here. And the last one, another TR for the last column for the submit and the reset forget password, I meant to say. So I'm just going to use only one column here. So I'm going to do TD, but I'm going to make this to be empty because I want my reset password to be in same line where my input fields are. So I'm just going to come here and do another TD. This will be empty while I'll copy these two values over to this side. I'm going to copy these two values over here. So I'm going to save this, and let's see what this looks like. We'll refresh this, and now you can see that our form is actually looking a bit nicer. So I forgot to add a legend like what we have over here. So I'm going to copy this legend, and I will place it over here. So now we can take away our first form. I'm going to delete this, backspace it, save this, and come over here, refresh. So now you can see that our form is at least looking a bit nicer even without using CSS to style this up. So we have our email, and this is actually still selecting that nice, and we have our password. This is our login, and this is our forget password. So this form is actually not really doing anything right now, because for a form to work, we actually need to connect it to a backend service that is going to perform the backend logic to make us to actually log in. And unfortunately, that is not being covered in the scope of this tutorial series. But to do that, we just need to learn some of the backend languages. So if you're interested in learning the backend languages, you can simply suggest it in the comment box, and when I see the interest, I may consider doing a tutorial for that as well. So I'm going to save this now, and I'm going to build another kind of form. Let's just go through this quickly. Now, this is our legend. Our legend actually creates this one here. Then we created the table elements, and in this our table element, we have our TR, which is a new row. And in this our new row, we have two things in our new row: the enter your email and the input. Like you can see on this row, enter your email and the input on a single row. So we have this one on the left hand side, and we have the input on the right hand side of the column. So that's just how it works, and I intentionally never added the T head, so we won't have any kind of title attached to it actually. So let's go on, let's create more type of tables, and we've also seen here that we have our type, the email, type of email, and we also have the type of password. We have the type of submit, which is actually a button. So that being said, we can also create more forms, and this is going to be a registration form this time around. And now I'm not going to be using a table anymore, since we've already seen how to style this up with a table. So call this register student. So let's come over here. So the first thing that we need to do is actually the name, and I'll be using the other way. I'll go label, and this time around I'll say name. I'll say the name. So I'll just go full name, so we won't have so much repetition. So let's go full name, and here we're going to have what's the inputs, and I'll press tab. That's wrong. I'll press tab to auto-complete that. So I'm going to be using the input type of text, because what I actually want to write in here is actually text. And now I'm going to show you something. So I do not want the student's name to be, since it's the full name, I want to add some kind of restriction. I know that this full name could not be so short. We have a name like Ada, and Ada is just a 3-letter. But when you are talking about full name, it simply means your surname, your first name, your middle name. So I want to add a restriction that the user should not be able to add a kind of any length of text that is less than 6 characters. So I'm going to say that add an attribute here that says that the min length should be equal to 6. And I also want the max length. The max length should be equal to, let's just use 12 for now, actually, as a sample. So that's being said over there. We're going to come here, and just because we want these to appear next to one another in a block form, I'm going to be using a div here. Though it's going to, my IDE is going to flag an error, but this is still going to work. I'm going to leave it. If I should use label, they're all going to appear side by side. So I'm just going to be using a div here for now. And I could also just apply a label here. A label, and take this away. And do it this way. This could also scale, so maybe let's just do this. So this is for the first name, and the next one I would like to add, I'm going to copy this, so I'm not going to write too much. It's actually the DOB. So let's just write that in full, the day, or let's say DOB. That's the date of birth. Now the date of birth is actually not just a text. I don't want them to just put in anything. So I'm going to say the type is going to be a date. actually. So we also have another type called date, and since we were talking about dates, we don't need to add the min length or the max length anymore, so we'll just leave it this way. So this is the date of birth, DOB, and we're leaving it this way, and we're going to add another one, and we're going to say this is the age of the student. So the age is going to be of type number over here, and let's say the student actually should have an email, so we're going to say the email of the student, and this is going to be of type email. Actually, we're going to say the phone number of the students, and let's say phone, and this is going to be of type phone, of type tel. I meant to say this is going to be of type tel. So this is just what we have here, and at this point we're just going to make another one. We'll put div here, then we say button. This time around we're going to be using button. So button is equal to, the value of the button will be submit, or let's say register student. So register student.